Serious, what are some cryptid slash ghost slash unexplained stories you'd be willing to share? Hi everyone, it's Em. Thanks for joining me today. It really means a lot to us. Please enjoy today's video. Story 1. One night, I was watching the conference at home with my little sister when we heard someone putting a key into our front door and opening it. We're sitting in a living room next to a sliding door that was very close to the front door, so we both heard it very clearly. No, this didn't alarm us. We knew our dad had recently gone out to get some stuff, so we just assumed he'd return. "Dad, you're back already?" I casually asked. There was no response. "Dad?" I asked again, thinking he had not heard me the first time. Again, silence. At this point, I get the feeling that something isn't quite right, and I could tell by the look on my sister's face that she was quite nervous as well. I'll note that up to this point, she spent the evening rolling her eyes at horror movie cliches, and she very rarely gets scared. We looked at each other for a moment, wondering what we should do, before we started hearing a few more scattering sounds from right outside the sliding door. I was frozen and feared by this stage. I tried one more time in a louder but shaky voice. "Dad, is that you? Please respond. Please respond." I repeated it in my head, but the silence continued. Now at this point, I'm freaking out and I literally jumped off the couch. My sister also abruptly gets up and starts rapidly walking towards the other end of the room, which leads to the kitchen area. She later revealed to me that she was planning on grabbing a knife. She had this horrified look on her face that I hadn't seen before. We looked at each other in nervous silence. I didn't really know what to do, and I didn't want to make any further sounds. I finally decided to walk up to the sliding door and began opening it as slowly as possible, peering into the darkness. I know, I literally became the idiot who investigates the unknown creepy noise without anything to protect myself with. When the door was finally opened wide enough, I poked my head out and scanned the corridor, preparing for the worst. To my surprise, there was no one there. But what was more strange was that the front door was still completely shut. We never heard the door close. My sister and I were obviously both extremely relieved, as we were almost certain that there was an intruder in the house. After this, I immediately went to go ask my mom, who was situated in her bedroom at the other end of our house, if it was her or whether she had noticed anything. She told me that she thought my dad had come home as well, and she also heard someone opening the front door around half an hour later, which felt like an eternity at the time, as we were still quite shaken from the incident. My dad finally arrived home and confirmed that he had not come home earlier. So to this day, my sister and I still have no idea what happened that night. This is a situation that I would want to try to explain as rational, but even sometimes that rational explanation is a lot scarier than the reality. Like maybe someone had broken in but heard people were home, but then decided to leave as soon as he heard you guys. But almost that's scarier because it means that they had a key to your house and in theory could get in whenever you want. What would you guys prefer? A paranormal occurrence or knowing that there's someone who broke in? Story 2. There was a really weird occurrence at my dad's house a few years ago. He woke up to the sound of dogs barking and realized that the neighbor's dogs were barking at something that was moving parallel to the road. When his own started to bark, he went outside to see what was up. Across the street is pretty much all forest except for a church directly across the street that at the time was just a gravel lot. My dad was too far away to see anything, but in the dead of night, he can definitely hear the sound of someone running at full tilt across the gravel. A few things freaked him out from this. 1. Whatever it was definitely ran on 2 feet. Try having a dog run on gravel versus a human, and you can tell the difference. And it was big. Both myself and he have witnessed large animals like bears and moose running through the underbrush, and according to him, it sounded like it was of a similar size to those creatures. 2. It was easily running somewhere around 40 to 50 miles per hour in the clearing of the lot, then slowed down again as it went back into the woods. He was able to compare this speed because the road itself is 45 miles per hour limit, so it was going just as fast as a passing car. 3. The final thing. Its huffing and gasping was so loud. You could hear it from his front door, and it was obviously not human. We looked online later to compare its sound to other animals, and it really didn't sound like anything he'd ever heard before. The freakiest part was the almost synchronous reaction the dogs had. He's never heard dogs react like that before. Both him, my stepmom, my stepbrother, and several of our neighbors all can account for hearing the strange barking from the dogs. But it was only my dad who heard what they were after. Nothing happened like that since, and I've never personally witnessed anything like it. We do live right on the border of the Cascade Mountain Range and are surrounded by park and forest federal land, if you want to get an idea of where this took place. Maybe it was a mountain lion of some kind or some other animal that wandered a bit too close to civilization. Or it could be one of the many different animal-like monsters that are indigenous to mountains. I think if it had started talking, I would have booked it out of there faster than the Roadrunner. Story 3. My grandpa lived in an extremely rural, underdeveloped area in the 40s to 50s when this occurred. Every time he would walk to school in the early morning, it would be pitch black, especially in the winter. There was this huge, old, unoccupied house that he'd walk by each morning, and each morning he'd see the entire house light up as if there were automatic lights or someone inside flipping all the light switches. The thing was, it was an ancient house in which no one lived, but more important in my opinion, the electric lights in every room weren't a widespread thing where he lived, even in houses with living occupants. Another one. My dad, his two brothers, and his parents. His father was the grandpa who walked by the haunted house. Had their share of poverty at certain points in my dad's childhood, to the point where my grandpa eats shortening and cucumber sandwiches to save money, to the point where their family went fishing in the nearby lake so they could have dinner. Which takes us into our next story. They were fishing for a good while with no bites. Suddenly, this random man appeared with a tiny fishing box set up right next to him and started to fish. My grandpa would always emphasize how small the fishing box was, because he'd say the man took out a bucket, bait, tackle, etc. from it, like he was married to Poppins. He had very quickly pulled in a lot of fish. Then, according to my grandpa, who pulled out a big knife and a board, cut and cleaned the fish, pulled out a big box, put the clean fish inside, gave the box to my grandpa, and just left. They never saw him again. My grandparents and my dad think it was Jesus. I don't know what my uncle thinks. I've never talked to them about it. Not sure of the veracity of these same stories, but at least with the second one, there were 3 people who very earnestly told me the same story. It's so funny to me that Jesus' partial second coming was just to deliver some fish. I wonder if he brought any loaves to go with it. Story 4. At my old middle school, I would have volleyball practice twice a week in the evenings. My sisters, 2 years older and 5 years older, did the same thing at my age. I remember going to return the volleyballs upstairs from my coach one night into her classroom, which was 2 stories above the gym. Made it up the stairs and saw the door for the class across the hallway start to slowly open and a really bright light and smoke or something slowly drifting out, almost dancing. I booked it downstairs and had waited a little bit until my coach could walk up with me. The door was shut like nothing happened. About 8 or so years later, I was talking with my sister 2 years older than me about what I saw, and I was half expecting her to think I was being crazy. I go into detail telling her what it looked like, which classroom door and everything. She wasn't responding to me, so I looked over at her for the first time in a couple of minutes. She was crying. She told me she saw the exact same thing too, and couldn't go back upstairs alone ever again. Here's her leave to finally find out that she wasn't making it up in her head or being crazy. We thought of all the possibilities of what it could be. Custodians cleaning the lights on and maybe smoking. Nope, it was too bright for any normal lights. In there and way too dark outside for it to be shining through any window. Plus, the custodians would always clean after school and before practices. School was done by 2:30 and practice was always 6:30 to 8:30. We've heard many other stories from other kids at the school who had after-school activities and would see/hear weird crap. Still creeps us both out to this day. Story 5. I got home from school one day and decided to play a game on my computer. During intermission in the game, I would talk in a group chat with a couple of my friends. We were telling jokes and making each other laugh until I needed to run to use the bathroom. I told him I would be right back, and left my phone on my desk and didn't turn it off. When I returned, I noticed that some of the letters were being pressed even though no one was in the room with me. It wasn't a word that was typed, but random letters with an @ symbol spacing them out. To me, it didn't mean anything. So I asked my friends if they thought it meant something, but they were startled by it and didn't know what it meant either. I thought it was strange but decided to ignore it. Later that night, when I decided to go to bed, I turned off my lamp again under the sheets. My cat Portia was by me sound asleep. A few moments later, I heard what sounded like footsteps slowly creeping through the hallway to my bedroom. Suddenly, they stopped right outside my doorway. I glanced up and expected to see my brother, but no one was in sight. From her dead sleep, Portia bolted up, stood at the end of my bed, and stared into the hallway. I was confused since she'd never done that before. I tried to get her back to her normal spot on my bed, but she wouldn't budge. I even put my hand in front of her face, but she kept trying to peer over it. She eventually sat back down and went to bed. Since then, I haven't had any other experiences like that, and I still wonder if there was something trying to contact me that night. Maybe there was something trying to contact OP, but seemed to leave when he couldn't get an immediate response. Hopefully, it wasn't for anything pressing, and the ghost decided to just leave OP alone. Story 6. I grew up in an old house and my family definitely experienced events that were hard to explain. Besides all the usual noises and occasionally hearing your name being spoken, here's the top 2 weirdest things. 1. My brother and I were teens eating dinner in the kitchen. There's a glass of water on the counter. We heard a noise where the glass was and both looked toward it, and we swore we saw it move an inch. As we were still looking and discussing, the glass flew several feet across the counter and smashed onto the floor. 2. Once when I was in college and I was home for holidays, I was in the kitchen getting food prepared. I was home alone at that point and my brother was due home at any moment. I heard the front door open and close. I called out. I called my brother and heard nothing back. Then I saw a shadow pass by the kitchen into the hallway, and I saw my brother's being rude, so I followed and kept saying hello. I saw the shadow again turn another corner towards my brother's room. I saw my brother's door closing. At this point, I was calling out about what a jerk he was because we hadn't seen each other in months. I pushed the bedroom door open and uttered some insults. And the room, as well as the whole house, was empty. That was super chilling. I really had seen someone moving through the house. Fast forward 15 years later, and when my husband and I bought an oldish house built in 1870, I was up on the third floor arranging boxes and heard a very clear and polite woman's voice say, "Well, hello there. Never saw or heard anything in this house since." Story 7. I shared this on Reddit a couple of times. I'll make it short this time. 6 or so years ago, weird crap started happening in my mother's apartment. I lived there alone. She lived there with her boyfriend but kept the apartment anyway. The door to my bedroom would open or close on its own. At some point in the night, it would close or open at random intervals, with the door handle moving and all that. And not like slowly. Sometimes it would fall on, slam, shut, or open. I tried everything, closing all the windows to see if maybe it was the wind. Nope. Seeing if there was anyone else in the room. I never found anybody. Plus, the room on the other side was empty except for the wardrobe. Hell, it even happened more than a few times in front of a friend. The friend in question also told me my lamp started to switch on and off when I was sleeping. Not like in the movies where the lamp malfunctioned. She said it was like it was turning on, then off, then on, etc. Toward the end of this, the sofa that was right beside the door moved by itself while I was on it in the middle of the night, while I was on Skype on camera. The door kept opening and closing a few times a night for a few days, then it stopped. Also, I kept having sleep paralysis and visual and auditory hallucinations at the time. Lol. I honestly could have thought I was simply going crazy, but I had eyewitnesses. Never understood what happened this week. Never happened again. Wow, OP, that sounds terrifying. It sounds like Shark Week, but for ghosts. I wonder if you tried to look up the property number, if anything would have come up, explaining if the week in question had any historical significance, or any other kind of explanation, or if it really just was your week from hell. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.